Welcome everyone. We're down in Miamisburg here. We're getting ready to do the Main Street walking tour with Ken Ballinger. We'll get started in a little bit.
The calendar is available at the Historical Society. There is one change. If you see the brochures over there at the Historical Society, the second tour for Main Street is going to be on August the 9th instead of August the 2nd. Okay, so here's the brochure. We have these, or you can look on historicalmiamisburg.org, scroll down to guided walking tours, and there's a cleverly named link called Learn More. Also, something new this year, pretty excited about this. Next Saturday, there is I think it's called a Riverfront Revival or something like that. So the church people are going to be out all over town. But while they're doing that, we are hosting, or we are sponsoring, a historic church self-guided walking tour of the historic churches of downtown. So if you haven't been to those buildings, we'll talk about, no, actually none of them on this tour, but we will, on the other tours we do walk past them and talk about them, but this is an open house where you can go in, you can see the beautiful sunshine, crossing my fingers, shining through the stained glass, and if you haven't seen our historic churches for yourself from the inside, it's really, they're breathtaking. As you will see, we will have the old pickup with no muffler, or the Harley guys will be joining us temporarily, probably when I'm saying the most important thing of the morning, and they'll drive by and it'll be incredibly noisy, but what can we do? So, let us go ahead and get started by turning 180 degrees, in other words, face that way. And we're going to start out with the Gwinner block. Now, does anyone know why a building would be called a block instead of a building? Good thing I'm here with the answer then. It is because, well, they're usually bigger buildings because they have multiple floors that are purposed for multiple things. Generally, you have your business on your first floor, you have your offices and maybe apartments on the second floor, and then your lodge places or dance halls or meeting places on the third floor. So why do the meeting halls want to be on the third floor? Because when this building was built, and a lot of the buildings were built down Main Street, some of the churches didn't condone dancing the way they do now. So if you wanted to go dance, you went up on the third floor where no one could see you. So, and also with the fraternal organizations in town, and at one time we had every single fraternal organization you've ever heard of, all of them meeting here regularly, but they want the privacy of being elevated from the street level, so you're not just looking in the window of whatever they're doing at the meetings. Okay, so Gwinner Block was bought by Fred Gwinner in the mid-1800s. The previous owner had gone bankrupt, and this building has been home to just about anything you can think of. I think the Wagner's potato chip people were in here at one time. The offices of the Miamisburg newspaper were in here at one time. The third floor was the Knights of Pythias, if you remember the KFP from years ago. Anybody? Well, there's one of your fraternal organizations that's long gone, at least in this area. Actually, the whole building was called the KFP building for a while because they owned it all, but now they don't. But the third floor has a stage and a nice, what do they call it? There's a really nice ballroom up there, and that used to be one of the opera houses here in town as well. And the grand staircase is still up there. It's a bit steep. This is before building codes and OSHA and things like that. So it's a bit of a climb, but it's a beautiful staircase, and the flooring up there is gorgeous. It's a really thin wood design. It's really fantastic. Now it's a dance studio. Thank goodness the building was saved, because if you remember our hurricane in 2008, the wind caught the roof, picked it up off the building and slammed it back down, and the top of the building was condemned for several years while the owners were reattaching the roof. And when I was up there was no electricity. the pigeons had taken possession, and they had many of their friends with them, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay, it's not anything like it looks now. I mean, they've got a beautiful chandelier in there, and from what I understand, the dance studio is really doing some good business. We talk about this on the North Miamisburg tour, but I love this story, so here we go. On the back of this building has one of the unusual historic features of any building in Miamisburg, and of any building I've ever heard of anywhere. There is, and it's diametrically opposed to where we are right now. So the back corner of this building has a 2-story outhouse. Now I'm thinking that it's probably the seating is diverted so that the first floor people, well, you know where I'm going with that. But that might explain why the second floor apartments were a little more expensive, right? You get better seating. Anyway, now, Fred Gwinner actually had a home further south from our tour down Main Street, and he was one of the people who was instrumental in getting sidewalks and pavement in downtown Miamisburg. So he was an influential businessman of his time. Questions about Gwinner? Fraternal organizations, outhouses, anything so far? Okay, moving across the street, we have our historic Market Square building. It's called the Market Square building because this used to be the Market Square of town. Where we are right now is the original part of Miamisburg. It's close to the river, and these 90 plots that were through this area down along the river and everything, were the original plots that were sold in, they were sold in 1/5 of an acre lots, which are kind of small, and those were the original ones that were sold at auction in 1818 that created Miami. Okay, so where we are is the oldest part of town, and the Market Square building's been here since about the 1850s. I believe we have in our book, yes, you can see here there used to be a cupola on the front. This building, the arches used to be open, and there were farmers and butchers and people selling produce out of there. After a while, the other merchants in town asked the butchers not to continue their trade right here in the center of town because, again, I don't want to go into any detail because it's early in the morning, but it probably got a little bit tough to deal with later into the summer. So those were enclosed, and then they became. This has been the city hall. The city jail was here. There used to be a trough on the back of the building where the firemen from the old firehouse would walk their horses over to water them at the trough that was on the back of Market Square. Upstairs was the Boy Scouts used to meet there, the Girl Scouts used to be there. In fact, the Boy Scouts would get their marksmanship or shooting badges by shooting at targets that were put up on the second floor of that building. Now I know this because if you go up there, and it's a nice auditorium now, there are events that are, it's a rentable space, but you can still see the bullet holes in the wall from the Boy Scouts who didn't quite get the badge that time. Yeah. So, in addition, this is where the Historical Society had its headquarters for 20 years before we moved over to 5th Street, where we are now in the old library building. So this is where the Mary Ann shop was, if you remember that from many years ago. So this has been a multi-purpose building, but the way that it's set up here is unusual for driving traffic, but for horse traffic it was perfect. So it was designed, and it's been on the map of town since the earliest map of town. That it's always been called Market Square, to the best of my knowledge. Okay, let's move on down to the corner here.
That's new with the flags up there hanging.
Alright, so what we're going to do is, so you'll be able to see everything clearly, we're going to talk about this side of the street, and then we'll come back on that side of the street and talk about this side. Okay? I tried doing it the other way, and everybody was just doing this, and it didn't really work out well. Now, as you know, right over here next to Market Square is where the hamburger wagon is every day. And if you've ever driven through here, when they're open, you know how incredibly popular they are. I've seen people standing ankle deep in the snow. I've seen people standing in the rain, where there are dark thunder clouds coming overhead. During the pandemic, they had buckets set up 6 feet apart, and people were standing in line 6 feet apart from one another to get something from the hamburger wagon. So it's been a business here downtown since right after the 1913 flood, when Mr. Porter was making food for the people who were displaced by the flood, and also for all the aid workers and probably the military, because the Ohio National Guard was here for quite a while, several weeks, because the city was under martial law during the post-flood month and a half. From late March till late April 1913. Because, as you can see from the sign across the street there, that black and white sign, that's where the floodwaters were, just under that green awning. So this area right here was in real trouble. Now, of course, we didn't have the levee then. The level of the ground of the city has probably grown up as, we built on top of everything. But at the time, there was a significant amount of water flooding through here, as well as all the debris that had come down from Dayton, as well as the canal is just over here on the other side of First Street, so a block from here, and that all backwashed into town because it was just kind of a collection place. You just kind of tossed your cigar butts or your hamburger wagon sandwich bags or whatever into the levee or into the canal, because it was just sitting there not being used. So it had pretty well clogged up with sediment and everything, so all that washed out. It was very, very unpleasant here. For a city this size, and we weren't even a city in 1913, but we had statistically as much damage as Dayton. It's just that Dayton's larger. So there were actually newspaper articles from, say, Chicago West that said Miamisburg wiped off the face of the earth. Now, obviously we weren't, but there was a lot of damage. Because, as I said, this area right here was under 8 feet of water. Now, it didn't go past the railroad tracks and into that part of town. So that's where the original hamburger wagon was. He was actually camping out in somebody's backyard initially. And then after the flood, he came down to here to this location. So, does anyone know the other business that started right after the 1913 flood because of the flood? Fox Motors. Now the Foxes have been here. I talk more about this on the Second Street tour, but the Foxes have been here since probably before the Miami Indians came in. But I'm kidding, they weren't really there. But they, one of the founding families of the city. Foxes have been in, mayors and business owners, but the Fox business there has been there for over 100 years as a car dealership. But prior to the flood, they dealt more with horse and buggy kind of stuff. And after the whole front of their store was wiped out, and the Fox who was owning the business at the time said, this is too much of a hassle to deal with all this horse stuff. We should probably get into these horseless carriages. And so he started selling cars. They've sold all different models of cars there, DeSotos and Studebakers and things. The story that I heard from Tim Fox was that Walter Chrysler himself came down to Miamisburg and said, why don't you start selling my cars instead? So they were a Chrysler dealership for decades. And they were actually encouraged by Chrysler to move their dealership down by the mall. Happily they didn't. And now they don't have the Chrysler dealership anymore. They sell used cars and do a lot of service. If you have a chance and they're open, stop in over at Fox Motors, because they have a little mini version of all their historical stuff. And the original elevator is there, where they, and again, I found something else out from Tim Fox. This is really cool. When they were selling cars back in the 20s, they would take a carriage over to the railroad depot on 4th Street, and they would pick up a big box off the train. They would bring it back, take it up the freight elevator to the 2nd floor, open the box. It had all the pieces in it to build a car. So they would build the car, put it back on the freight elevator, and bring it down to the showroom. So I didn't even know that was how it worked, but there it is. So he can tell you all about that. Just give yourself plenty of time. There's a lot of history in that building. It's really cool. Okay, so Market Square, hamburger wagon. Moving on to the Ross Bakery. It was owned by one of the Weavers. Prior to that, it was a building that was owned by Isaac Treon, who was one of John Treon's brothers, and John Treon was the doctor who was one of the founders of the city. And so when he had the building, that's when the Masonic Lodge was meeting on the 3rd floor. So that was 1840s, quite some time ago. Once the Ross Bakery took it over later on, by then the Masons had moved clear across the street to this new building here, and they met on the 3rd floor with the Oddfellows for many years before moving on to 2nd Street, and they've been ever since. So the Ross Bakery, as you can see here on page, we're already up to page 8, is that possible? Wow. Anyway, this is not the first location of the Ross Bakery. He slowly moved his business up Main Street, and when we get down the street a little bit, I'll share some more about, I think it was his grandson was on one of the tours and told me a little bit more about Ross Bakery. Does anybody remember the Ross Bakery? And what was your favorite thing to get?
Peanut coffee cake.
I've heard of it. Yes, that's what everybody says. That's great. It must have been really something, because, yeah. So after they were here, they moved around the corner a little bit, and more where Bucher Insurance is. But this was their storefront for many years, and you can see, I mean, the brick-colored sign right there says Lost. So very easy to find. Questions about anything so far? Before we move way south to the very next building. Probably should have said something sooner, but I've added some stuff to this tour. Is it okay if we go ahead and incorporate that so you get some like even more free stuff on a free tour? Are we good? All right. Put a pin in it. We'll get back to that. Leasing off block. Again, retail, offices, meeting rooms. Leasing off built this building in 1884. How do I know that? Well, he put the name on the building. He was a tailor. Came over from what's now known as Germany, but back then it was a bunch of little kingdoms. And I have a photo of him in archives, and really impressive beard, really prominent looking guy. And started this business after he came to New York first, then he came to Middletown, then he moved up here and started this business. And his advertisements were for fine men's furnishings, which is suits, tuxedos, bow ties, all that kind of stuff, cufflinks. So his store was here for many, many years. It's the only building, to my knowledge, that has the porthole windows, for no particular reason other than he probably liked that design. Sometimes the simplest answer is the answer. So this has been a number of businesses. Thurkeld's was here, Hoffman's was here, Joffy's Dress Shop was here, there was a Five and Dime, there was a dance studio, Wagner's Potato Chips was here, our sadly departed local potato chip company. Now, of course, we have Curious Styles, really cool little place to go into, great coffee, and the Christmas store, which did it open last year?
It opens for about a couple months each year.
Okay.
That's it.
Sometime around
November, I know. No, maybe
Christmas?
even December.
Christmas. That was the
Oh.
tagline there.
Mm.
Anyway, so apartments on the second floor. Prominent businessman. He died in 1899. His son Edward took over, and he managed the business until the 1920s. Then he went out west and spent the rest of his life in Beverly Hills, California. I don't know why. You know, opportunities are what they are. Moving on to the Silverman Building from 1900. There's a problem with Main Street, okay? Because from where we started, okay, down to Linden Avenue, where we're going to turn and come back this direction, I was doing the tour for a couple years, and I was saying there were 30 bars through here. And then somebody corrected me and said, no, there were only 29. So there was a bar everywhere. Do you remember the old, you're going to have to be more specific, because what was the name of that bar on Main Street?
It was a nasty little
It's like a
bar.
central. It's like the central thing. It's like white and just the door,
Yeah.
and it.
Dark inside, smelly.
Basically describing half of them, but that one was bad.
Now that's a bar. All right, well, sadly it's no longer here. So we're just going to have to make do with the 10 or 12 that we have left.
That's all right. They got the. No, actually, it is. You go downstairs. That's your little speakeasy. Remember?
Yeah, and
So it's there. It's just underground now.
and much cleaner.
Oh yes,
It's
very
a pretty
nice.
neat little room down there. Entropy has done a great job. If you haven't been there, go. They also have food and soft drinks, so you don't have to go and tie one on with your neighbors.
A kid area. They got. Yeah, they.
Yeah, it's really a nice place. They've done a lot of work with modernizing the downstairs, but still keeping kind of the character of it. But it's good to see these buildings, and then of course the apartments upstairs are expensive luxury apartments, and from what I know, fully occupied. So somebody had a good idea and it worked.
Who was Silverman?
Silverman had a shoe store here originally, and this is where the White Front restaurant was. Sutman's was here for a while before they moved. Or no, wait a minute. Yeah,
No.
This is where Sutman's was. The Kroger store moved up here for a while. We'll talk a little bit more about Kroger. And then, Sutman's, the men's store was here. And it also went into this little addition. If you remember Sutman's.
Yeah.
Everybody went to Sutman's. Okay, so. But yeah, another prominent Miamisburg name is Silverman. Okay, well, let's move a little bit further down the street. Anybody remember the jewelry store that used to be here, Paff Jewelry? Okay. This was the site of the first telegraph office in Miamisburg, right there. There was a barber shop here, and the conductors on the traction car line would stop there and go take a bath. So that's what this building was known for before it was the jewelry store. Yeah, they had some pretty nice stuff in here. Now the only way I know that is because my wife knows jewelry, and she said there was nice stuff in here. To me, I just see shiny colors. I don't know anything. So that's why I'm not allowed to buy her jewelry, because she's afraid of what I'll bring home. So anyway, that's where the train conductors used to stop and take a bath. So that's now next to that is one of the two Stocker buildings, and that's S-T-O-C-K, not S-T-A-L-K. And yes, Andrew Stocker. He was a 3-time mayor of Miamisburg. furniture business, and like many of the people who were in furniture businesses here in town, they also made funeral furniture, coffins and etc. So Stalker studied with the Bruff family, who were over on 2nd Street. It's probably one of the older or oldest funeral homes in town. And remember that up until really the 20th century, having a funeral at a funeral home was unusual. You normally would have it in the front room of your house, and then you would go from there to the cemetery. So their funeral business was not the same as it would be today. But Stalker apprenticed with the Bruff family. He had his furniture business, and then later he expanded into the funeral business as well. And so he had his furniture store on one side of the street, and then we'll talk about his other building where he had his business. The funeral business was on the other side of the street. So he is the only person in Miamisburg to have two buildings with his name on it. He was as I said, he was a 3-time mayor, very successful cabinet and furniture maker. He made some of the altar pieces, the ornately carved altar pieces for the original Catholic Church, which was St. Michael's down further south. But I don't think that those pieces have survived. So unfortunately, we don't have any examples of that. All right, so next to that, you'll see we have a lot. Now, I don't know if these stories are connected, but let me just tell you about these two buildings that used to be here. Okay, so now this is the Stalker building. This is M & Company, which is a great store for notions and whatnots and fun stuff. It's a great store. Next to that used to be at 54, which would have been somewhere in this area, was the Beekler building. And that was lot 19 of the original 90 of Miamisburg. So that's a very old part of town, original part of town. The Beekler building there was built, it was originally, there was a log cabin there, which was owned by one of our early citizens named Robert Hurd. And Beekler purchased it in 1878, and the family was there in business until 1976. So there was a grocery, there was a hardware and a general merchandise store, and they were in business for about 112 years. Now next door to that at 58, which is also part of this big open lot, was the Hartzell Dubs building, which was it was a ladies' store to buy fancy hats. Now, I don't know if this is related, but you see it's an empty lot now. At the Beekler building, for many years, this was the only place in Montgomery County where you could buy dynamite. So I don't know if maybe something went wrong, and then, that's why we have a lot here, but there were some fires down here, and the buildings were unfortunately not rebuilt. So anyway, there's a little bit of local history. If you were looking for dynamite 100 years ago, right there. Now there's an interesting story during the flood. South of town, the railroad, the Big Four, there's that railroad trestle that goes over Old 25. Well, they had a larger embankment at the time, and it created kind of a funnel. So all the debris and everything came south of town, blocked the river, and then it backwashed into town again. So we kind of had a double flood. And the story is from a woman who was writing to her sister at the time that some guys jumped in their car, whatever kind of car they had, and were driving over to Centerville to get dynamite so that they could blow the railroad bridge and get all that debris out of here, because we were getting all that extra stuff into town during the flood. Now, I don't know, the last thing I would want to do is be in an open top car during heavy rain, driving up a muddy road that's bumpy with a box full of dynamite. So I think they probably thought best and did not do it. And that's probably before the Beeklers were selling dynamite right here, because it's foolish to go to Centerville. Or maybe the store was flooded and all the wicks got wet. I don't know. But anyway, that's another dynamite Miamisburg story. So 2 dynamite stories in one tour. All right, next to that Now it's Miamisburg Appliance. Okay, this is the Kirsting building, which was a men's tailoring shop. So maybe you couldn't afford to go to Leasenoff's for your men's furnishings, you would come here instead. Now this store, the family lived on the second floor, and in later years there was, this is where Fisher's ice cream store was. Anybody remember Fisher's? Well, their slogan was, eat a dish a day. And that was on the front window of this when it was an ice cream store. So I think we all missed out. Next to that is a very interesting building, which is the Mays and Boehner building. They had a shoe business. Now, again, Otto Boehner, one of the great, one of our city leaders. He was a member of the Businessmen's Association. He was in the 1912 to 1915 picture that we have. All the businessmen of Miamisburg, all wearing white shirts and bow ties, posed in front of the fire station for a picture, and there's 4 or 5 rows of all the businessmen in town. Otto Boehner was one of them in this building here. Now during the flood, he was stuck in the second floor and had to climb out to the next building, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And that's how he got out during the flood. Now, some people were trapped, you know, there's no cell phone service, there's no internet, there's, you know, any phones that they would have had, we wouldn't have had widespread phone service in 1913. So you pretty much had to just look out the window and wait for the water to go down. And there were also other local animals that were looking for high ground. So sometimes you were fighting it out with animals that were up there with you. It was very, very unpleasant. It wasn't just the water and the debris floating through town. A lot of people were trapped on the second floor of their buildings, and they just had to wait it out. One of the officers of the First National Bank, which is up on Main Street, it's gone now. It's where the parking lot is. He was trapped for 2 days. They had to carry him out because he was really too weak to stand up. So really tough time. Now, this was also, you see here it says the last record store in America. This is where the Kondoff family had a business for many years, and then the son didn't want to go into the father's tailoring business, so he opened a record store with his mother, and they were in business for about 25 years together, and they had all the latest vinyl, all the latest 45s, and all the cardboard cutouts of the artists and movies and all the posters and all that stuff in there. When Chris Kondoff decided to go out of business in the 70s, he just put the paper up in the windows, locked the door, and sealed it in time. Hello. It was like a local legend kind of a place for many, many years. Finally, a record collector got a hold of him, got inside the building, and walked back into the 70s because all the displays were still there, all the vinyl was still in all the display cases, the 45s, the posters. He bought a lot of the vinyl and stuff like that, but I think the family kept some other things. But that's why it's called the last record stores, because there weren't record stores like that by the time, it was the 2000s by the time the guy got in to look over the record collection and buy it out. He was a collector from, I think he was from Scotland or somewhere, but he was doing business with a guy in Texas, so who knows where the records ended up, but they were here sitting waiting for 25, 30 years. Pretty amazing. Now, of course, it's U Creative, and they've done a lot of design work for not only businesses here in town, but also the Air Force Museum, and I believe the Reagan Library in California. So they're a pretty well-known company. Now, the challenge, of course, and maybe stop in and get a donut sometime and stand here in the parking lot and try and guess all the musical artists on the side of the building. Anyone? All right, well, let's move down one street, one building here and talk about the Richmond building. Okay, before it was Bear Creek Donuts, before it was anything, this building was an addition to all the hotels in town, and they weren't just on Main Street, but all the hotels that were anywhere in Main Street were called the something house. Okay, so this was the Miami house, and it was probably built 1830s to 1840s. I mean, this was right on the, it's on the river here. The canals right here, you know, there would have been stagecoaches going through here, then the railroad was here. So perfect place to have a hotel. And the owner during the mid 1800s was a guy named Hezekiah Black. Now, I don't think there are enough Hezekiahs anymore. That's a name that should come back. But he was pretty successful, and when he died, his wife Elizabeth took over the business, and she later on became John Treon's second wife after his first wife died. So, and Treon was very, very wealthy. So there was a lot of money in town at the time. But she built this building here for her son-in-law, Michael Ritzman, and because he had a clothing business. And so this was originally the storefront for what was called the Ritzman addition to the Miami house. Now, interestingly enough, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, one of the things that this building was known for was there was a giant grapevine that was in the lobby. And it's even the people that I asked them, I said, what happened to the grapevine? And they looked at me like I was crazy. It's funny that it's a wine shop now, because there was a grapevine in there for decades. But it was pretty well known, and it was growing through the whole ceiling of the building, I guess. So one of the interesting things about coming to this particular hotel is you could see the grapevine. So years later, this was where the Star City Cleaners were, and then it was Taste of Wine, and now it's Jane's on Main. Really nice wine shop. Again, apartments upstairs, and then this was the location of Kroger number 10, the 10th Kroger in the U.S. right here from about 1902. So after it was the clothing store, this was the first Kroger in Miamisburg right here. But it was only the 10th one in the state, so we got in pretty early with the expansion of Kroger. And one of the people who's taken the tour with me a couple of times is retired from Kroger, and there were 6 Kroger locations in town before we ended up with, or the 6th one is our new marketplace over in Heineke. So they've moved kind of this direction, then this direction, then that direction. So, but this was the first one. Photos of that inside of that Kroger, it was definitely a place you would want to go. Everything was beautifully designed, and you know, the pyramids of cans and all that kind of stuff. It's a beautiful store. Okay, questions about anything so far? Anything at all? How come we got so lucky and got a beautiful day? That's a good question. All right, well, let us go down here to the corner and cross the street.
And this was the historic Miamisburg, the Star City, Main Street Tour, presented by Ken Ballinger of the Miamisburg Historical Society. And that will conclude our great tour with Ken for Main Street Tour. Got a lot of good information there. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe and come on back for the next one. Not sure what it'll be, but there'll be another one. And you have a great one.